Was Pelagius of Asturias really a Visigothic noble or just a local warlord? Did the Battle of Covadonga actually happen, or was it a legend created centuries later? And how did a small group of people manage to create a Christian polity that resisted Muslim rule? I'm David Cott, host of New History of Spain, and in episode 25 of the chronological series, we will separate fact from fiction and uncover the real story behind the origins of the Kingdom of Asturias. Asturias and Cantabria in the year 700. In episode 24, I talk about the Reconquista as a nationalist historical narrative and why is it wrong to understand it as a war or a period. And today I will explain the origins of the Kingdom of Asturias. Let's start by giving some context to the situation prior to the Muslim conquest. Asturias and Cantabria, two regions in the north of the Iberian Peninsula, had been part of the Roman Empire and had undergone Romanization, although this experience was quite different from that of other imperial regions, where cities, aqueducts, and amphitheaters flourished. Instead, these were peripheral territories where Roman influence was less pronounced. In the 1970s, historians Barbero and Vigil argued that the northern peoples of the Iberian Peninsula, the Astures, Cantabria, and Vascons, had never been fully integrated into the Roman Empire or the Visigothic kingdom and had retained many indigenous pre-Roman traits. However, this indigenous interpretation has since been debunked by archaeological and historical evidence, which confirms that northern Iberia was indeed Romanized, even if being Roman meant something different in Asturias than it did in Egypt or Germania. Thus, whenever I refer to Astures or Asturians, I'm simply referring to the inhabitants of modern-day Asturias, without pre-Roman ethnic connotations. By the 4th century, with the decline of mining activity, the Cantabrian mountains lost their small urban centers. By the 5th century, the society and economy of northern Iberia had become largely localized and autarkic. As a result, the Roman administrative system based on cities collapsed, allowing the local landowning elite to assume control, managing land, fortified settlements, and dependent laborers. The Cantabrian mountains did not become independent due to an active struggle for independence, but rather because they were a marginal, economically insignificant region that was simply abandoned by an empire in free fall. Christianity reached Asturias and Cantabria in the 4th and 5th centuries, but it did not fully take root until the Visigothic period, when missionaries arrived and monasteries and Christian hermitages were founded. Nevertheless, some historians argue that paganism still existed in the region as late as the 8th century, when the Kingdom of Asturias emerged. The westernmost part of Asturias had been incorporated into the Suevic Kingdom of Galicia and later into the Visigothic Kingdom, but the rest of Asturias had not. The modern provinces of Asturias and Cantabria were not part of the Visigothic Kingdom. Rather, their local elites engaged in sporadic interactions with the Visigothic monarchy, sometimes recognizing its authority and paying tribute. However, there were also instances when the Visigoths had to launch military campaigns to extract tribute by force. Thus, we can say that Asturias and Cantabria were within the Visigothic sphere of influence, but were not integrated into its administrative structures. The north, from central Asturias to Navarre, was stateless during the Visigothic period. It is understandable that neither the Visigothic kingdom nor the church made strong efforts to establish an institutional presence there, given that these were sparsely populated, cityless regions of little economic interest. The task of founding Christian places of worship fell primarily to local aristocrats and later to the Asturian kings. Archaeological evidence suggests that there was an agricultural expansion in Asturias in the late 7th century. This likely contributed to the development of a more complex social hierarchy, which had been less pronounced in earlier periods. As a result, new elites emerged, bringing about a level of socioeconomic inequality unseen since Roman times. One particularly striking discovery is that in Asturian valleys and mountain caves, local aristocrats were buried alongside weapons, jewelry, and other valuables such as ceramics and Suevic and Visigothic coins. This reflects both the increasing social stratification of the region and the fact that the local aristocracy maintained ties with the Visigothic kingdom. However, this does not mean that the Visigoths exerted political control over this area. A useful comparison can be drawn with the so-called Gothic fields or Tierra de Campos in modern-day Castile and Leon, where it was once believed that the Visigoths had settled in large numbers because graves contained Gothic-associated artifacts. Today, however, historians interpret these findings differently. Rather than proving that Visigoths had settled there, this suggests that inhabitants of this peripheral region of the Visigothic kingdom in the 6th century sought to associate themselves with the Goths to distinguish themselves from their still independent neighbors. Similarly, it is likely that Asturian aristocrats sought to align themselves with the prestige of the Visigoths, a phenomenon that could help explain the later emergence of the Neo-Gothic ideology of the Asturian monarchy. This narrative, which depicted the Kingdom of Asturias as the rightful heir to the Visigothic kingdom, played a crucial role in legitimizing Asturian rulers and in shaping the Reconquista discourse in later centuries. The Revolt of Pelagius. Both Latin and Arab sources agree that Asturias initially submitted to the Muslim conquerors without resistance, and its elites negotiated to retain their lands and social status under the new Muslim authorities. Historians have long debated the origins of Pelagius, the first independent governor of Asturias, as these have major implications for the supposed continuity between the Visigothic kingdom of Toledo and the Kingdom of Asturias. Some link Pelagius to Visigothic royal families, while others see him as a local magnate from Asturias, with little connection to the Visigothic administration. Asturian chronicles from the 9th century describe Pelagius as a Gothic aristocrat, though they offer notably different accounts of his origins. The Chronicle of Albelda places Pelagius in Asturias, stating that he had been exiled there due to his conflict with King Witiza. This account absolves him of any responsibility in the fall of the Visigothic kingdom and makes no mention of his connection to King Roderick. The Chronicle of Alfonso III, in the Rotense version, portrays Pelagius as the royal guard of Witiza and Roderick, making him a close associate to the last Visigothic kings. According to this version, Pelagius initially capitulated to the Muslims, and the Berber governor of León and Gijón, Munuza, sent him on a diplomatic mission to Córdoba. During his absence, Munuza married Pelagius' sister without his consent, and this led Pelagius to break his pact of submission and rebel against the Arabs and Berbers in Asturias. As discussed in episode 22, the Muslim conquest of the Iberian Peninsula, marriages between Muslim conquerors and Hispano-Gothic noblewomen were common. These unions provided the legal means for Muslims to acquire large estates. However, under Visigothic law, if Pelagius, as his sister's presumed legal guardian, did not approve the marriage, she would lose her inheritance rights. This was likely Munuza's true objective, if we are to believe this account. And according to the Chronicle of Alfonso III, in the Obetense version, when the Muslims arrived, Visigothic aristocrats, including Pelagius, fled towards now France, or in most cases, to Asturias. There, these magnates formed a council and elected Pelagius as their princeps, their sovereign, claiming he was of royal blood and the son of a Visigothic provincial duke named Fabila, supposedly assassinated by King Witiza. The Obetense omits any mention of a pact between Pelagius and the Muslims. Instead, it depicts him as someone who resisted from the very beginning of the conquest, while still maintaining some distance from the much criticized figures of Witiza and Roderick. Beyond politics, Asturian chroniclers drew heavily from the Bible to magnify Pelagius and the Battle of Covadonga. They drew parallels between Pelagius and Judas Maccabeus, the leader of the Jewish revolt against the Seleucid Empire. The exaggerated claim of 187,000 Muslim deaths at Covadonga mirrors the story of the Assyrian army that perished during the siege of Jerusalem in the Old Testament. The Asturian chronicles also portray Munuza as one of the main generals of the Muslim conquest, alongside Tariq and Musa, to enhance the significance of Pelagius' victory. However, in reality, Munuza's role was much more modest. He was simply a governor and commander of a Berber garrison stationed in Gijón and possibly in León. Arab sources are not particularly useful in reconstructing the historical Pelagius, as most do not offer an independent account but rather derive from the work of Ahmad al-Razi, who was influenced by Asturian chronicles. Thus, Andalusi chroniclers adopted some elements of the Neo-Gothic narrative of their increasingly powerful Christian enemies. Nevertheless, historian Eduardo Manzano Moreno highlights that in Al-Makari's work, there is a unique version of events stating that Pelagius was from the Astures, not the Goths. According to this account, Pelagius was held as a hostage in Córdoba to ensure the obedience of his people. He later escaped during the rule of Governor Al-Hur, sometime between 716 and 719, and the Astures expelled the Muslim governor's lieutenant from Asturias. This version is worth paying attention to, because it does not follow the Asturian chronicles. Instead, it identifies Pelagius as an Asturian who rebelled during Al-Hur's governorship, lending further credibility to the traditional date of the Battle of Covadonga in 718. So, what really happened? Historians Santiago de Castellanos and Iñaki Martín Viso suggest that the Kingdom of Asturias originated from a group of landowners in eastern and central Asturias. These elites rebelled against the Muslim governor of Gijón because they saw integration into the Umayyad Caliphate as detrimental to their interests, primarily because they received nothing in return for paying tribute. We shouldn't rule out the possible marriage of Pelagius' sister with Munuza as a possible motivation for the revolt. Rebellion was not an inevitable choice, as other peripheral regions, such as La Rioja, opted to collaborate with the Muslims. This suggests that local elite decisions played a crucial role. Given all the information we have, it seems most plausible that Pelagius was a local magnate with his power base in Asturias, rather than a Visigoth. Pelagius is never mentioned in Astorga, the capital of the frontier Visigothic province of Asturias, actually located in modern-day León. Instead, his revolt is consistently situated in eastern and central Asturias. A charter of Alfonso III confirms Pelagius' own land in central Asturias, making it unlikely that a recently arrived Gothic refugee would have suddenly acquired landed estates and established himself as the leader of a local rebellion. If Pelagius and his allies were indeed Asturian aristocrats, his revolt could be understood within the framework of frontier societies. In the Visigothic period, Asturian and Cantabrian elites sometimes paid tribute to the Goths, but at other times refused, prompting Gothic military intervention when Visigothic authority was strong enough. This pattern of submission and rebellion likely continued under Muslim rule. In other words, before Pelagius, there had already been anonymous Asturian leaders who fought against the Goths. The difference is that Pelagius' revolt gave rise to the first kingdom in northern Iberia, filling the power vacuum left by the Goths, Arabs, and Berbers after the political instability of the 740s. Another striking fact is that Pelagius' name is Latin, not Germanic, unlike all Visigothic kings. Even later Asturian rulers such as Fabila and Alfonso bore Germanic names that are undocumented in the Visigothic period. This does not rule out the possibility that some Hispano-Gothic refugees fled to the Cantabrian mountains, as suggested by the Asturian chronicles, and that they were present at the kingdom's foundation. This could explain the Neo-Gothic ideology of the Kingdom of Asturias. However, it seems far more credible that its key leaders were members of the local Asturian elite. Before we continue, let me remind you that if you are finding this episode valuable, you should subscribe to the New History of Spain on YouTube or podcast directories, and you can help me continue producing history content in English by supporting me on Patreon. The Battle of Covadonga, Myth and Reality. After Pelagius was chosen as the sovereign of the Astures, the chronicles present the Battle of Covadonga right away. It is essential to understand that the Asturian accounts of Covadonga are not intended to be a factual military report. Instead, they serve as a providentialist interpretation of the battle's outcome and a political legitimization of the Asturian monarchy. As in biblical texts, Covadonga is presented as a story of salvation for a chosen people. The Goths had lost God's favor due to their sins and were punished with defeat and oppression. In contrast, the victory at Covadonga marked the recovery of divine favor for the northern Christians, particularly for the dynasty of King Alfonso III, who commissioned the writing of these chronicles. This providentialist mindset was not unique to the Asturians. It was common among Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike. And naturally, if someone claimed to be chosen by God, who could question their legitimacy? The date of Pelagius' revolt and the Battle of Covadonga had been widely debated. The traditional date was 718. Later, historian Claudio Sánchez Albornoz argued that it actually took place in 722, based on an Arab biographical compilation that mentioned the death of a Muslim soldier in that year at the hands of Christians. Since Sánchez Albornoz believed that the only active Christian front at the time was in Asturias, he concluded that the soldier must have died at Covadonga. However, this interpretation requires a great deal of imagination, ignoring the fact that Muslims were also fighting on other fronts in the Pyrenees and Septimania, which had not yet been fully conquered. Still, since Sánchez Albornoz's authority was nearly unquestioned, 722 was widely accepted as the date of the battle by many historians. This date remains attractive, but for other reasons, as some Arab sources place the start of the Asturian revolt in the time of Governor Anbassa. Anbassa was known for increasing tax pressure, which certainly led to resistance, much like similar tax revolts occurring elsewhere in the Caliphate, such as Egypt and Tangier. If Covadonga occurred in 718, it would have been under Governor Al-Hur, known for establishing Córdoba as the capital of al-andalus and consolidating Muslim rule by incorporating Pamplona and the regions of Barcelona and Girona. A completely different theory was proposed by García Moreno, who dated the battle to 737, linking it to the failed campaign of Governor Ibn Katan in some mountainous area. However, as discussed in episode 23, the Governorate of Al-Andalus, this theory has serious issues. As a result, most historians cautiously refer to either 718 or 722 without committing to one date, so that's what I'm going to do too. According to the chronicles, after escaping an attempted arrest by the Arabs, Pelagius gathered his followers, who elected him as princeps. He and his men fortified themselves in a cave on Mount Auseba, now known as Covadonga, preparing to defend against a massive Muslim army led by a commander named Alcama. Opa, the brother of King Witiza and a bishop who had sided with the Muslims, attempted to convince the rebels that the resistance was foolish and offered Pelagius a chance to surrender peacefully. However, Pelagius refused without hesitation, positioning himself as the alternative to the corrupt church that had submitted to Muslim rule. Despite their small numbers, Pelagius' followers resisted the assault of 187,000 Muslim soldiers. Thanks to divine intervention, a miracle occurred, and the Astures triumphed, because they were the chosen people of God. The story of Muslim catapult stones mysteriously turning back echoes the story in Genesis of the parting of the Red Sea, where Pharaoh's army was destroyed while pursuing Moses and the Israelites. Similarly, the Muslims were almost entirely annihilated. The few survivors fled, while Opa was captured and taken prisoner. Upon hearing of the disaster, Governor Munuza and his Berber troops in Gijón evacuated in fear, but they too were trapped in a mountain pass and killed. With God on their side, Pelagius and the Asturian people had defeated the Muslims, giving rise to the hope of liberating all Christians from Islamic rule. This, of course, is what Christian sources tell us, but what do Arab sources say? According to the Abah Mahmua, compiled in the 11th century, the Muslims had conquered the entire country except for one rocky area, where Pelagius and 300 men had taken refuge. The Muslims attacked them, and many Christians died in battle or from hunger, while others surrendered. Eventually, only 30 men and 10 women remained, surviving only on honey from the beehives of Covadonga. Seeing that they posed no real threat, the Muslims gave up the fight and dismissed them, saying, quote, 30 barbarians? What harm can they do to us? End quote. However, later Arab chronicles nostalgically lament that the Muslims did not take the revolt seriously, recognizing that this was the birth of the Christian resistance that will ultimately end Muslim rule in Iberia. So, what's the truth about the Battle of Covadonga? Some historians have gone so far as to deny that the Battle of Covadonga took place at all. It is not mentioned in the Mozarabic Chronicle of 754 or in the earliest Arab accounts. Some believe that Covadonga's story may have combined local events with the Berber revolt of a man named Munuza in Cerdanya, in the Catalan Pyrenees, or Ibn Katan's campaign. However, most historians do not go to such extremes. The lack of contemporary sources does not necessarily mean the battle did not occur. It may simply have been too minor an event for the Umayyads to record. The historical consensus is that Covadonga was a skirmish, a small-scale conflict involving few combatants. Still, referring to it as merely a skirmish may underestimate its significance. In the 8th century, a military conflict involving several hundred fighters could certainly be considered a battle. By critically analyzing both Latin and Arab sources, we can conclude that in response to Pelagius' Asturian revolt, the Muslims launched a modest punitive expedition which was defeated. This allowed the emergence of a small, isolated principality in the mountains, the germ of the Kingdom of Asturias. Both Christian and Muslim sources agree that the battle took place in a mountainous area, which hindered the mobility and effectiveness of the Muslim forces, who were unfamiliar with the terrain. By removing the divine intervention and providentialist elements from the narrative, we can explain the Christian victory through the strategic advantage of the terrain and the locals' superior knowledge of it. The victory at Covadonga symbolized the recovery of divine favor for the Christians of the nascent Kingdom of Asturias. Just as God had granted military victories to biblical kings or the righteous Visigothic rulers like Recaret against the Franks, Pelagius' triumph was framed as a penance and redemption for the sins of the last Visigothic kings and clergy. According to the Reconquista narrative, the Kingdom of Asturias was born from the ruins, mistakes, and failures of the Visigothic kingdom. Covadonga represents both the foundation of a new political entity and the restoration of an uncorrupted church free from Muslim domination. For Alfonso III, it was a key element in legitimizing his dynasty. In the right-wing national Catholic narratives, Covadonga is a foundational event in Spanish history, marking the first step toward national liberation from the eternal Muslim enemy. Pelagius, the sovereign of Asturias. Even the greatest advocate of the Reconquista, Claudio Sánchez Albornoz, acknowledged that Pelagius likely did not intend to continue the Visigothic monarchy. Instead, he was a warlord, not a king with a court and governmental apparatus. In fact, Asturian sources never refer to him as king, but rather as princeps, a title from ancient Roman times which can be translated as sovereign, leader, or first among equals. This suggests that Pelagius was not significantly above the landowners who supported him in terms of power, so it's actually too soon to talk about a Kingdom of Asturias in these earlier stages. The emerging Kingdom of Asturias was essentially a polity constituted by a group of large landowners from Asturias and Cantabria, united not by loyalty to a strong central power, but rather by personal ties of allegiance and private economic interests. Pelagius and his immediate successors had one primary goal: to survive without submitting to the Muslims, residing in the small, remote settlement of Cangas de Onís. In its early years, the Kingdom of Asturias was limited to central and eastern Asturias, known in historical sources as Primorias, as well as the Cantabrian region of Liébana. The Picos de Europa mountain range provided natural protection, and the Muslims showed little interest in the region. With no economic or strategic value, no cities, and difficult terrain, it was not a priority for them to control the region. In a way, poverty and geography saved Asturias from becoming a major target of Muslim expansion. After the Battle of Covadonga, the chronicles merely state that Pelagius ruled for 19 years and died in Onís. However, it is likely that he had other skirmishes with Arab and Berber forces. Could archaeology help clarify what happened? The archaeology of early 8th century Asturias is still a developing field, and it's important to remember that archaeology tends to reveal processes rather than specific events. Between León and Asturias, a warning system consisting of watchtowers and signal fires was established, similar to those found throughout the Iberian Peninsula during the Muslim conquest. Defensive structures have been discovered at Cantabrian mountain passes, built to block narrow, elevated paths. Examples include the Muro de Teberga and the Omón de Faro. These fortifications were quickly destroyed, but when were they built? Radiocarbon dating of Omón de Faro suggests a wide time frame, ranging from 650 to 710 or 620 to 790. This allows for multiple interpretations. They could have been built during Visigothic campaigns against the Astures. They may have been part of Arab and Berber operations during the conquest. The most intriguing possibility, favored by many researchers, is that they were linked to Pelagius' revolt. However, the broad dating range makes it difficult to draw firm conclusions about the origins of the Kingdom of Asturias. Additionally, excavations have not been able to confirm that Gijón was inhabited in the 7th century, suggesting that the Muslims may have reoccupied the site. The fact that Gijón disappears from historical records for over a century after the expulsion of Munuza's Berber garrison may indicate that the early Asturian monarchs deliberately avoided establishing power centers near the coast. Moreover, there may have been some Asturian elites who collaborated with the Muslims and lost power in retaliation after Pelagius' revolt succeeded. Shortly after Covadonga, Pelagius arranged the marriage of his daughter Ermesinda to Alfonso, the son of Duke Peter of Cantabria. Since there are no Cantabrian chronicles, we do not know what happened in that region during the early 8th century. It is unclear whether Cantabria was briefly occupied by the Muslims, as Asturias, or whether it had its own independent resistance movement apart from Pelagius. However, it is clear that Cantabrians do not appear at Covadonga, and that Alfonso later joined his father-in-law winning battles before Pelagius' death in 737. Upon Pelagius' death, his son Fabila succeeded him, marking the first dynastic succession in the Kingdom of Asturias. It is possible that in that same year, the governor Uqba ibn al-Hajjaj launched an expedition against Asturias and Cantabria. This campaign may have resulted in another Asturian victory, leading Fabila to commission the first church built by Asturian monarchs, the Church of Santa Cruz in Cangas de Onís. According to some historians, the church was built over a Neolithic dolmen, symbolizing Christianity's victory over paganism. Tradition holds that the church originally housed the Victory Cross, the wooden cross that Pelagius carried at Covadonga, later gilded with gold and precious stones by Alfonso III. However, radiocarbon dating confirms that the wood was carved during the reign of Alfonso III, meaning the Victory Cross was a fabrication to strengthen the Reconquista narrative. Not much more is known about Fabila, as he died just 2 years into his reign. According to later legends, he was killed by a bear during a hunt. An inscription from the now lost Church of Santa Cruz confirms that Fabila had multiple children, but his descendants did not inherit the throne. Instead, his brother-in-law Alfonso assumed power. According to the Obetense Chronicle, Alfonso succeeded Fabila. However, the Rotense describes his rise as an election, suggesting that the succession was not purely hereditary, but rather legitimized by the approval of Asturian elites. Regardless, as we will see in future episodes, Alfonso I of Asturias took advantage of the collapse of Umayyad authority to expand the kingdom's borders. The verdict. History is full of revolts against distant rulers, but what really pushes people to take up arms? Pelagius and the Asturian elites rebelled when they saw no benefit in paying tribute to Córdoba and Damascus. Much like the American colonies, resisted British taxation without representation. In both cases, the issue wasn't just money. It was the right to govern themselves without interference from an outside power. Yet not everyone who is taxed rebels. Many regions in al-Andalus and the American colonies chose to cooperate rather than fight. So what makes the difference? It is a matter of leadership, circumstances, or a cultural identity that refuses to be assimilated? Do you think taxation and autonomy were the biggest drivers of independence movements before the contemporary period? Or were there other, more important factors at play? Let me know in the comments. And with that, the verdict ends. If I have debunked myths and misconceptions you had about Pelagius and Covadonga, please hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and support the show on patreon.com/newhistoryspain to help me continue and to enjoy benefits like early access to all my content or exclusive merchandise. In the next episode, we will explore the fall of the Umayyad Caliphate of Damascus. Thank you for your attention, and see you soon!